Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, July 11th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the Big 12 Media Days. There was a ton to unpack from the last couple of days in Las Vegas, and we're going to try to get through all of it today. Maybe some stuff trails into tomorrow, but we'll figure that out when we get there. Then we'll get into the Ohio State Buckeyes, a ton going into this season, but I want to ask a question that I think should be asked quite some time ago, but is it really national championship or bust for the Ohio State Buckeyes? Do they need a championship, or is that just something that is very much in the goals for this team this season? We'll break down what I think they have to do and why I think it's not necessarily a full national title run. Then we'll get into the most impactful freshman. We'll continue that. Did the SEC yesterday. We'll get into the Big Ten and go through all the conference contenders and give you the guy that I just think is the biggest coming in his first year. And then we'll get into a Hot Take Thursday where I'll break down why I think being a blue blood just doesn't really mean all that much. It's a very, very cool title, but that's about it. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here. Excuse me, I apologize. You can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and that's always good for the both of us. So definitely use that if you would like. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in because there is so much to cover from the Big 12 Media Days the last couple of days. Frankly, I thought this was going to be something of a more tame couple of days in terms of the media days that are coming up. I didn't think there was going to be any crazy news that came out. Well, there were about 5 different things that were crazy that came out of this. So I want to start breaking this down, and we'll get to what a lot of you, I'm sure, are waiting for, which is Mike Gundy, a little bit later on. But I want to start with Brett Yormark, and I want to start with some of his comments that he made throughout this conference that they had. He is obviously the commissioner of the Big 12, was hired a couple of years ago, right in the middle of the Texas OU transition to the SEC, handled that very beautifully, I thought. I think it was in the best interest of the conference and of everyone in that conference to get them out pretty much as quickly as possible, and he went out of his way to make that happen. And now he's going on the offensive. That was the one thing that stood out more than anything else from the last couple of days, and there were plenty of things that stood out, but this guy is out for blood. That's really the best way that I can put it. This guy absolutely wants the Big 12 to be, as he put it, the number one conference in the country. He said he is not going to stop until that happens. Frankly, they're a far cry from that being the case, so I hope he's ready to just run for quite some time. But regardless, there is some news around that definitely does lean in that direction for the Big 12 to be a powerhouse moving forward, and we'll get into that in details tomorrow. But it sounds like Florida State and Clemson might just be in talks with the Big 12, but we'll jump into that obviously a little bit deeper tomorrow. But this guy is insatiable. That's the best way to describe him. When you bring in a guy from the TV world into the college sports world, he's going to know what everything's about. He's going to know how to handle his business, how to go about these negotiations, and more than anything else, he's going to be a little bit ruthless. He's going to go after some people, and he's going to be aggressive in the way that he goes about managing this conference, and he's done a great job thus far, that's for sure. He's done a fantastic job just getting them through this pretty crazy time and backfilling with some really good brands in Utah and Arizona and Colorado, obviously, have been huge for this program, but there's going to be a lot of big things that have to happen in the next couple of years, months, whatever it is. But it seems like everything is on the table for this for this conference, at least in terms of making money. Whether that's sponsorships on the fields for the teams or on the for the conference, that's something we've talked about a little bit. I fully expect that to happen pretty much across the country. I believe Texas Tech actually already unveiled a couple of logos they're going to have on their field. So definitely something that I expect to happen much more consistently throughout that conference, and they're looking very much towards private equity, which would obviously help them with some of the realignment stuff. So this guy is going to be one of the most important people in the sport going forward, and he definitely has the power to make some real noise. But let's get into what pretty much everyone wants to talk about when they talk about the Big 12 Media Days right now, and it's that guy right there. Mike Gundy went to the Big 12 Media Days with a lot on his shoulders. There's no two ways about that. When you have your star player go through something like Ollie Gordon did with the DUI arrest and a lot of things just not necessarily going super great in the PR world of your organization, you'd love for your head coach to handle it just a little bit better. And I'll give a little bit of context here if anyone did not see it. First, I'll start with one of the comments he made a little bit earlier in the day when talking about Ollie Gordon and if he was going to play to start the season. He said yes. He said that's not a question. He will be in those games to start the season. That's not up for debate, which frankly, I tend to agree with him on that. I could see an argument that he should be suspended for 1 or 2 games, but at the end of the day, I think if they handle it internally and if Ollie Gordon, moves forward and understands the mistake he made, which it really seems like he did, he handled this beautifully throughout the last couple of days, but whatever punishment that he feels is right, I'm more than fine with that. He did double down and say if there's any punishment, it'll be him running the ball 50 times in the first game. Now, this is a relatively benign comment. I'm not necessarily going to tear apart Mike Gundy for this comment because I think he was just, making a little joke or just, it basically just, it's relatively benign. But the reality is, it's not necessarily the greatest response. It's one of those that I don't think he was trying to, make light of the situation. I don't think he was trying to make a joke, but I do think he didn't answer that question necessarily the way that you would love him to if you're the PR or media director over there at Oklahoma State. And then he went a little bit further later on in the day because he was asked a question later in the day just asking about how he went about making that decision. How he went about, is Ollie Gordon going to play? How much is he going to play? How's that all going to work out? And he said some words that were not too great. He said for a number of different things. He talked about being over the legal limit. Ollie Gordon came in at a 0.1. The legal limit, obviously, a 0.08. So not too far over the legal limit. And he went with that a little bit. After looking up that metric, he claimed it could be 2 or 3 beers. Gundy said he could have easily done that 1,000 times and just not gotten caught. That's not a great thing to say. It's not. I want to get out in front of this because I know a lot of people are saying this. He was not justifying what Ollie Gordon did. I understand that was not a good comment to make, and the PR team and the media training team was none too happy at him for sure. But at the end of the day, I promise you, he was not trying to justify what he did. He was trying to justify the decision that he made around Ollie Gordon. That being said, this is just outright a bad answer. There's no two ways about that. I'm not a genius. I've never been in his shoes. I'm not trying to throw stones, but I do know when to say he made a mistake, we're moving forward, and we'll punish him internally, and that's about it. I know when those answers need to be brought out, and that is one of those situations. So overall, just not necessarily the best way to go about business for Mike Gundy. He was also asked who's the face of the league now, and he said, it's got to be me, right? So Mike Gundy is a pretty wild dude. He's had some comments in the past that have been very, very interesting. This one might just take the cake, but at the end of the day, Ollie Gordon handled this absolutely beautifully. I think he was incredibly smart and incredibly forthright about the decision that he made and the mistake that he made, and was really just a consummate professional throughout this entire thing. So it's a little wild that the young kid is handling this a little bit better than the adult in the room, but at the end of the day, I don't think Mike Gundy meant any harm. I don't think he was trying to excuse his Ollie Gordon's behavior by any means. I just think he misspoke and create a little bit of a nightmare for the PR team over there at Oklahoma State. But at the end of the day, it was a very, very interesting quote to see come across your page, but I'm not necessarily going to tear him apart for that. As long as he handles this correctly in-house, I got no problem. But we'll see if Ollie Gordon gets 50 carries in the first game, because that would be quite the sight. But let's continue on here and talk about Kyle Whittingham and the Utah Utes. And one of the big things that broke out was obviously about Cam Rising, coming back from that year-long injury and ton riding on this year. And he spoke a little bit about this year, but the big news that came out was he will not be back for 2025 and an 8th year in college football. He has decided that 7 years is plenty long to be in college football. And although I am a full believer of play football as long as you can, because not everyone gets this opportunity, I think Cam Rising is in a position where if he has the year that I expect him to have, he can be a draft pick, probably a later round draft pick, but still a draft pick and find his way into the NFL. So I think he's likely gone at the end of the season. And then Kyle Whittingham is the other big question mark. The future of him is very, very interesting, and he gave about as little of an answer as we could possibly get while getting some type of context about his future. They were asking him about a future matchup that was scheduled for 2027, I believe against Cal. I could be wrong about that, but I want to say it was Cal. And he did give a hint just saying, I will likely not be in this position by the time that game happens. So by 2027, he's gone. That's the best that I can give you as of this moment. I tend to believe that he will be gone at the end of the season just because of the recruiting implications of making Morgan Scalley the head coach in waiting. But who knows? Maybe he sticks around for a little bit longer and they just kind of ride this wave. But at the end of the day, I tend to believe this is it. So enjoy this guy while you got him, because this is one of the best head coaches in all of college football. But let's move on to the guy that is the show. Deion Sanders always is making waves with a ton of the things that he says, and some of them are really, really benign, and people make a big deal out of them. Some of them are really just fun to unpack. And he had a couple that were very, very interesting, but I do want to start with a very interesting theme that I saw throughout this thing when other coaches were asked about Deion, because that's a question that they're going to get from now until eternity while they are in the Big 12. But everyone was very, very complimentary of what he's doing. And I know there's this idea that people behind closed doors absolutely hate Deion and they hate the way that he's going about business. And I'm not arguing that there are some coaches even in that conference that aren't too gung-ho on Deion being in the conference, but they all believe that he's doing a really good thing for college football, and I don't really think that can be argued at this point. It can be argued, whether his teams are going to be fantastic moving forward. It can be argued whether he's going to be there at Colorado moving forward, but what he's done at Colorado has been just outright magical. He's built an entire college football entity out there in about 2 years now that is one of the biggest, one of the most followed in the country. And while, the wins don't necessarily pack up the same as some of the other big guys, it's still a huge deal. There's no two ways about that. So I thought that was the biggest thing. Also, a very fun fact, Joey McGuire, the head coach over at Texas Tech, coached Deion Jr. When he was in high school. So a very weird connection between those two, but that was pretty cool. He also said Travis Hunter is the best wide receiver and cornerback in the country. I don't think he's either of those things. Frankly, I don't think I'd put him in the top 5 of either of those things. That's not to say he's not one of the best football players in the country. It's just to say if you're going to play 130 snaps, it makes it a little bit harder to be the top 5 in both of those positions. But still an outrageous player, and absolutely love the confidence from Deion. He obviously did drop a little bit about the NFL draft, said Shedeur and Travis could go 1 and 2 overall. I don't expect that to happen, but again, that's the confidence that comes with this team. And then finally, the big one that made noise was Shedeur Sanders made a comment that was Quinn Ewers-esque. He decided to say, we are everyone's Super Bowl when asked about the intensity going into this season. And I'll say the same thing I said about Quinn Ewers. I absolutely love this energy. I don't necessarily think it's true from a football perspective, but when you look at, the energy that those teams are going to be coming in with, they're going to want to beat that team really, really badly because of all the hype, because of all the talk, because of who these guys are. They want to beat them really badly. So it's not necessarily the craziest statement in the world, but it is the right mentality to have. If you're going into this season, especially with all of the eyes on you, you need to go in with that intensity. There's no two ways about it. And then finally, just a little thing here. Chris Kleiman broke down some very, very interesting things around Avery Johnson and Matt Wells, the new offensive coordinator over there. He says they're gelling just like no one else. It looks beautiful in practice, apparently. And if that's the case, it's a very scary proposition for the rest of the Big 12, because if Avery Johnson is comfortable in this offense year-round, they're your Big 12 champion. I feel pretty confident in that. So he also said he expects a huge year from DJ Giddens, the really talented running back. So a ton to break down from this Big 12 media days. And we didn't even get to the biggest thing, which is around realignment, which we will totally dive into tomorrow. I promise you that. But it could be that Florida State and Clemson might be in these conferences in a couple of years here, but we'll break that down when it comes time. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes. We're going to ask the question that everyone's been asking: is it really title or bust for the Buckeyes this upcoming season? And if it's not, what is it? What is the moniker that they have to reach, or this season was an outright failure? So I'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the Big 12 Media Days. I have a feeling we're going to continue talking about that just a little bit tomorrow because there was so much that came out that I didn't have a chance to get to in that segment. But let's jump into Ohio State and let's ask the question that everyone is asking. Is it really national title or bust for the Buckeyes this upcoming season? Because when we talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes into this season, everything is on the table. There's not a thing that they can't do, including going 17-0 and rolling over literally everyone in their schedule and being one of the most dominant teams in college football history. That is truly on the table for this team. This roster is out of this world. The coaching staff is incredible, and it's going to be really, really fun to watch. But the question still stands: is it really national title or bust? I tend to believe no, but it is a huge season for Ohio State nonetheless, and there's going to be a ton riding on it. Obviously, Ryan Day did the thing that a lot of coaches do when they're under a little bit of scrutiny, when some people are getting a little bit worried about their future. They give up play calling duties. It's something that's happened a couple of different times throughout the last, 10 or so years in college football. Some head coaches who are play callers will give up those duties, go on to win a national title. It's something that people worry about with Lincoln Riley, something people worry about with Kalen DeBoer and Steve Sarkisian, and we'll see if that continues to hold up. But it was a move that was made up in Ohio State this past offseason, and he hired one of the best guys in the business. Chip Kelly is going to do an incredible job with this offense. It's not an easy offense to, get a hold on if you're a quarterback, but once you do, it's going to be pretty incredible what you're capable of. Losing 3 years in a row to Michigan can't happen. That's just the reality, but it did. And now losing 4 years in a row just cannot happen. So the reality is if they lose to Michigan, regardless of what happens the rest of the season, there will be some Ohio State fans after that game that are calling for his job. I can almost promise you that. They could walk in 11-0, be one of the most dominant teams in the country. If they drop that game, there will be people that do not want Ryan Day as the head coach going forward. But on top of that, Ohio State is one of the most talented teams in the country, in the most talented team I've ever seen. I feel pretty confident saying that. Now, I'm a younger guy, so didn't necessarily get to see the 2001 Miami teams and some of the remarkable teams of the past, but this is one of the most remarkable rosters that I've ever seen. There's not a hole in the 2 deep. There's not a hole in the 3 deep. It's insane what they have up at Ohio State, and the amount of energy that has been put into this particular year and this particular staff and this particular roster is out of this world. It is no secret that Ohio State upped their NIL game a ton in the portal this last season. It's no secret getting Caleb Downs and getting Quinshon Judkins, it took a little bit of NIL money. Not saying that that was the driving force, but they stepped up their game quite a bit. If you ask anyone that knows anything about those negotiations, Ohio State was willing to do what needed to happen to make this team as good as possible. And then you had guys that came back from the draft that you could argue shouldn't have from where they would have fallen in the draft, but they absolutely could have and would have been drafted. Denzel Burke, JTT, Jack Sawyer, and many others, especially on that defensive side of the ball, could have found their way into the NFL and had very little problem finding a place to play. But the cherry on top is what this is what their starting quarterback said. Will Howard has said that outright, that this is a national championship or bust year, and while I disagree with that sentiment, I do agree that every single person in that building has to think that. Every single person in the Ohio State building has to think we have to win a national title, because you have to show up with that just extra little edge every single day. So that's why Ohio State is the team this year. That's why everyone is pointing in the direction of Columbus, Ohio, and saying, Ryan Day's got to deliver. This team's got to deliver. So many things have to happen for this team, because all the chips are at the center of the table. Now, all the chips are always at the center of the table at Ohio State. They are always after that national title every single year, bar none. This year, they basically just added a couple of gold bars to the middle of the pot. Like, it's insane what they've done to build up this team for this year. So obviously, it's a huge year. There's no two ways about that. This is the time to strike. This is the time to win a national title and get back on top of the sport. But is it title or bust? Is it, do they win a title, or this thing is an entire failure? I say no, and I say that for every single team that has ever existed, and will say it for every single team that will exist going forward. No team should ever be title or bust. I understand the sentiment that is going into this, don't get me wrong, but I do think there is a reality where they go 16-0 and they're rolling into the national title and they're a fantastic team, one of the best teams in the country, and then they fall to Georgia or they fall to Texas and by last-second field goal or by, a freak play in the fourth quarter. And I'm not going to sit here at the end of the day and say that was a total failure. I understand that it's a disappointing finish. I understand it's not the way you wanted to finish the season. But you still went 16-1. You still did a ton of incredible things, including beating Oregon, beating Michigan, winning a Big Ten title, getting to a national title in the first year of the 12-team playoff. And the fun little tidbit here is if they win that 12-team playoff, they'll be the first team to win the 4-team and the 12-team. So that's kind of just a weird little wrinkle into this season. If they meet Oregon in the championship, same matchup in both of those. So just a little thing to watch throughout the season. But college football is any given Saturday. Everyone understands that there are some games that just don't make sense. The UCF beating Oklahoma State a year ago, 45-3, that made no sense. App State going into Kyle Field and getting that win last year made no sense. College football doesn't make sense, and especially in those late season games, those semifinals, those finals, the variability is just insane, and the amount of margin between winning and losing is razor thin. So I'm not going to sit here and say that they have to win a title, because that's just putting too much on one specific game where maybe you just don't play your best football. And I understand that there are some scenarios where if they get blown out in that championship game or get blown out in that semifinal, then I do have a problem. I won't argue that. But I do want to get into what I think would be a true bust for this season and a true disappointment for the Buckeyes, because the expectations are through the roof, and they should be, because there's a number of things that they just plain and simple have to do. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. You got to beat Michigan. You got to knock off the team up north, because losing to that team 4 years in a row is a nightmare scenario for Ohio State. It's a entire group of recruits coming in and going through their time at Ohio State without beating that team once. That's insane, especially when you think back to before those 3 years when Ohio State pretty much dominated this thing from start to finish. It was insane, the control they had over, and then it flipped on a dime, and they got to fix that this year. The next thing that they have to do is find a way to get to Indianapolis. Now, I don't necessarily think they have to win it. I think they do have to get into that game, but same principle I used for the national title, I'm going to use for this game. They could just not play their best football that day, and they'd still be in the playoff, and that would be more than fine. That's the other thing. They got to make the playoff. There's no two ways about that. They should be one of the top 12 teams in the country, even if a number of things go wrong. As they did last year, they were still a top 12 team in the country. So I think they definitely do have to make the playoff. They don't necessarily have to be a top 4 seed, but on top of that, they got to get to the semis. I do think that is a reality that just has to happen for this team. And I understand that is incredibly lofty, because if you don't get that bye, you got to win a game possibly on your home turf, possibly not, but then you got to win another huge game against a team that maybe beat you or another team that won their conference. It'll be definitely a huge fight for them. Or if you do get that bye, you still got to play that big time game against maybe a team that just got hot with a big time win in the first round. So there's a lot of variables there, but this team is head and shoulders above the majority of college football when it comes to talent level, when it comes to coaching, when it comes to NIL resources into this year. Everything is put into 2024 for Ohio State. So it's that simple for me. Win the game. Win that Michigan game. Beat Michigan, and bar none, that is number one goal. Get to the Big 12 or Big 10 title. Absolutely do that. That's no question. They need to do that this upcoming year, and then make the college football playoff semis. I think if they do all those things, everywhere else I'm good. I think they could go, 14-2 or 13-2, and this season would be successful. I think they have the ability to do that. Now, if you're an Ohio State fan, you want a title. You want a Big Ten title. You want a national title, and I fully understand that because this team is darn good. But I'm never going to be someone that says this is national title or bust, because I don't think that exists in pretty much any sport. I do think they're a crazy high bar for this team. I do think it's one of those teams that if you were going to say national title or bust about pretty much any team over the last 2 decades, I think this might be the team that you would say it about, but I still wouldn't agree. I do think this is going to be a huge season for them, and there are a lot of lofty, need to happen type things. But at the end of the day, I think they're still a team that if you get to the Big Ten title and beat Michigan on the way and get to the semis and lose on a last-second field goal like you did in the playoff a couple of years ago, it's hard for me to sit there and say that's a failure. Now, all that to say, every single person in that building up at Ohio State, up in Columbus, should think that. There's no two ways about that. Every single player, every single coach, every single nutrition person, strength and conditioning, whoever it is, they should think that way, because you have to approach this year as the biggest year of your life, as the biggest year. It's definitely the biggest year of Ryan Day's coaching life. It's definitely the biggest year of a lot of these guys' playing careers. There's so much going into this year, and if you're not walking into that building saying every single day we have to win a national title, you're probably going about your business the wrong way. Now, I won't say that, but I fully think and fully agree with Ohio State players, Ohio State fans, Ohio State personnel saying that to the nth degree. So this is a huge year. There's no two ways about that. It is as much pressure I've seen on a team really ever going into one particular season. I don't think I've ever seen a team that has this much riding on them, but it comes with the territory. You are Ohio State. You do have the most talented team in the country by, I don't want to say a comfortable margin. Georgia's nipping on their heels a little bit there, but at the end of the day, you do have the most talented team in the country. You did put just insane amounts of money and resources into this year. If you don't deliver, then let's just say Ryan Day is going to have a very interesting offseason if he doesn't deliver. I'll leave it at that for the time being. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, I'm going to get back into my guys for the 2024 season. I have a couple of guys here that I just think are going to have a really, really good season. Some of them are a little bit more experienced guys. Some are new guys that you might not know about. I did dip down into the group of 5 level to give you some guys that would be fun to watch at that level. So I think this is a really, really fun group, and maybe you'll learn a name or two that you didn't know about that are really, really fun players. So stick around, and we'll be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Ohio State and how I don't necessarily think this season is national championship or bust, but there are a lot of things that they have to do this upcoming season in Columbus, and it is as much pressure as I've seen on a team in really ever, if I'm being totally honest. But let's jump into segment 3 here, and let's get back into my guys for 2024. This is part 3 of this segment, and if you haven't seen this segment before, it's essentially just a lot of guys that I have high hopes for this season, and not, Luther Burden, and not, Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, because they're going to have good seasons. I'm going a little bit deeper down the well for some guys that maybe you don't know about, maybe you do know about, and just need a little bit more love. And also, on top of that, you can come back at the end of the season and make fun of me if I got these guys wrong. But at the end of the day, let's jump in here and break down some of the guys that I'm watching, and I want to start with Byron Brown. He's the quarterback over at USF, and this kid is just really special. He's one of those guys that you're just going to want to watch at some point this season. I understand USF might not be on the top of your list of teams to watch, even though it's a really, really fun product down there, but this is a guy that's just incredible. He makes so many fun plays on the football field and is one of those guys that if you are a college football junkie, you likely know the name already, but definitely tune into a couple of these games and just watch this kid go to work, because he owns 12 school records at USF. He set 11 of them last year, including season passing yards, touchdowns, completion percentage, and a ton of other things. He was one of only 2 players in the country to pass for 3,000 yards and 800 yards rushing a year ago. The other one was the Heisman winner in Jaden Daniels. So that's how good this kid is. He is a different type of dual threat quarterback that is outright scary for any defense that he faced. I think a lot of people love USF going into this year. They're one of those very popular group of 5 teams, and a lot of the reason is Alex Golish. He's done an incredible job as the head coach over there and is someone that I fully expect to be a Power 5 head coach by the end of let's say by the end of December, just for fun. Let's add a little intrigue to that. But Byron Brown is the number 2 reason. That this dude is absolutely special and is one of the best players in the group of 5 level, and definitely could lead the Bulls to a college football playoff this upcoming season, and that would be a really incredible thing to watch. So very, very excited about that. I definitely think he's someone that is going to surprise some people this upcoming year and could just do it in the playoff if he's lucky. But we'll move right along here. Jamal Haynes is someone that I just absolutely love for like a million different reasons. But the number one reason is he's 5'9", 180. He is not necessarily a huge kid. You would think he's about 3 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier by the way that he runs. He is a mean runner, and that's the best way to describe it. He hits every single hole with some anger, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he was smiling behind the face mask, because this is a kid that just really loves contact. He really just wants to be out on the football field, play hard-nosed, get a little bloody, get a little bit dirty, and I'm sure Brent Key loves that. I have to imagine that this is one of Brent Key's favorite players, because that's exactly how Brent Key is. So a very, very good player, totaled over 1,000 yards rushing a year ago, 7 touchdowns, 6.1 yards per carry, a very, very good rushing attack for Georgia Tech this upcoming year. So I expect it to be even bigger year for this kid. He's so much fun to watch, and I think he's this team's heartbeat. I think whenever they need a little bit of a boost, whenever they need that little bit of motivation late on in the 3rd or 4th quarter, this is the guy you're going to look to give that speech, and he's going to give a really good one. So I'm very excited for this kid. I think he could definitely take the ACC by storm, and maybe he just leads Georgia Tech to a very, very good season down there in Atlanta. But we'll break down the next guy here. Chris Lewis is an absolute dude. There are so many guys across the country that are really, really good at getting those 50-50 balls and playing up in the air. This is one of those that might be more special than anyone, if I'm being totally honest. He turns a 50-50 ball into an 80-20 ball in a second. He is really, really incredible in the air, and if the ball is anywhere near Chris Lewis, it's his. I can almost promise you that. So watching him a year ago was an absolute spectacle, and I expect much more from him this year. He started his career at Kentucky and then transferred over to Troy after 2 years where just not a lot happened at Kentucky. He caught 32 passes, 735 yards, and 10 scores a year ago. Did a really, really good job, and was a little bit surprised he didn't go over to Tulane when John Summerall did, but obviously he's found a home in Troy, is very, very happy, and he's doing really well, so I don't necessarily blame him for that by any means. I do think this is a guy that when you turn on the Sun Belt in the middle of a Saturday and you see an interesting game and you're watching Troy, just find number 6 on the field. Do yourself a favor and just watch that guy go to work, because a lot of balls are going to go in his direction, and when they do, they're caught 90% of the time. It's pretty incredible to watch this guy play, and he's one of those guys that I'm almost picturing right now being someone that just shoots up NFL draft boards because of the physicality, because of the ability to go up and get some passes, and definitely a team up in the NFL could fall in love with this kid. I'll just leave it at that. But the next guy I want to talk about, Nash Hutmacher, is a very, very good player. This guy is absolutely insane. And you look across all of college football, there are so many great defensive tackles. It starts with Mason Graham, Deone Walker, Dante Corleone, who unfortunately we likely won't see for some of the season with some blood clots that he's dealing with. Hope he gets healthy as quickly as possible. But there are so many people elite at that position, particularly in the Big Ten, that we kind of forget about this kid, but he is an absolute force. He is absolutely insane. He started all 12 games as a junior a year ago and had 40 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks from the defensive tackle position is pretty special. He played nose tackle for a good portion of the season, and that's huge for this team. One of the reasons that they were so incredible a year ago was no one was pushing them off the ball, at least for the majority of the games. There were a couple of games that did not look too pretty by any means, but that defensive line was really, really solid, and this guy was a huge reason for that, probably the biggest reason for that. So he is the anchor of that team and definitely as disruptive as really anyone in the country, especially from that nose tackle position. Nebraska's defense is going to be incredible for just about a million reasons. They have so many dudes across the defense that are going to make incredible plays, but I do think this guy is just different. I think he could be the biggest difference maker because a team like Ohio State, a team like Michigan, Penn State, they're going to want to run the ball, and they're going to want to do it a lot because that's the way that they're going to open up their passing game. If you can't run, then it's going to be a pretty long day at the office, and this would be a guy that would totally wreck that idea. So it'll be really fascinating to watch him. I think he's one of those players that can be an all Big Ten level player and just shoot up draft boards because the just nature of this kid is really, really remarkable. He's right in the middle of the defense, but he makes plenty of waves. There's no two ways about that. But then we'll move on here. David Benda is someone around Texas that I think just gets a little bit overlooked in all of the craziness around that. Obviously, you're going to talk about the offense and Steve Sarkisian and what he's going to do this upcoming year with Quinn Ewers. And then when you talk about the defense, you're going to talk about some of the worries on that side with defensive tackle not being quite as strong as it was a year ago and the secondary trying to make its way along and be a little bit stronger this year. But the linebackers in the middle of the field are pretty solid, and that's probably the reason that they're not getting talked about too much. But David Benda made 8 starts a year ago, made a number of big-time plays, including a big-time sack against Bama late in that game, and he's one of those guys that just can make every play on the field. He can do so many different things, is uber athletic, makes a ton of really, really remarkable plays, and has only gotten better over the last couple of years. That's been probably the player on Texas that I've noticed the biggest leaps over the last couple of years as Steve Sarkisian and his staff has kind of sunk their teeth into this program. This kid is just miles better than he used to be, and it's really, really incredible to watch, and I definitely think he's going to be huge this year. I think he's the emotional leader of that defense. I would expect him to be the green dot guy. I could see Anthony Hill, his running mate, being that guy as well, but I think they'll probably lean in the veteran direction and go with Benda here. But along with Jahdae Barron, he is the emotional leader of this team. I think him and Anthony Hill is one of the more underrated linebacking duos in the entire country. And I think David Benda might play himself into a pretty nice draft position this year because he can do just so many things. Is really good at rushing the passer, can get out and cover running backs when he needs to, and is just a really, really savvy player. Is getting much, much smarter, and I expect just a huge 2024 from him. And then finally, a personal favorite of mine is Devin Grant. He is a DB down at South Carolina. It's kind of unknown if he's going to play safety or corner, but he played safety at Buffalo. I got to see this guy a ton at Buffalo last year because I was working for a company that did some NFL and college scouting and got to watch this team every single week of the season. So got to see a lot of Buffalo football last year. Another reason that I think Maurice Lindquist, the new head coach or the new DB coach down at Bama, is going to do a fantastic job. He was the head coach at Buffalo, and Devin Grant had a year last year. He was an all-MAC selection a year ago, 5 INTs, led the conference, was, I believe, 6th in the country, if I'm not mistaken, 79 tackles, and had pretty much a ridiculous highlight every single game last year. He was just absolutely remarkable, was all over the field, and more than anything else, he found his way over to Syracuse to Fran Brown, which is the biggest boost he could possibly get. That is one of the best developers of DB talent in the country, and definitely one of the guys that can take him to that next level. Because when you look at Devin Grant play, there are a lot of things to love. But then there are a couple of plays where he just doesn't let it fully develop. He'll fly downhill and maybe just miss an angle or take a bad angle and miss a tackle, and it makes him look just a little bit goofy at times. Let's just put it that way. But I do think Fran Brown is one of those guys that can fix that right up. He's fantastic at just making sure guys are where they need to be. They set their feet and drive into a tackle. So definitely think that he's going to take a big step forward this year. A ton of really good players in that secondary for Syracuse, but this guy is one that I'm definitely watching very closely. Very excited for him. So a ton of guys that are really, really interesting going into this season, but I think those 6 could be really, really fun to watch. Actually, I did want to show you all of the guys that I have right now. So as you can see, have a ton of different guys from all over the place. Tried to dip a little bit into the group of 5 standings this time around, but definitely a ton of guys to watch for this upcoming season. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the most impactful freshmen for all of the conference contenders in the Big Ten. We did the SEC last time, so we'll jump into the Big Ten today, and there are a ton of guys to break down because there are 2 guys in particular in this conference that are just going to be huge in their freshman year. But we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about some of the big-time players that I'm watching up into this season. Did kind of a Tommy Guys segment going into 2024, but let's jump into some of the most impactful freshmen in the conference contenders in the Big Ten. We did the SEC yesterday, so if you'd like to go check that out, you definitely can, but the Big Ten has 2 of the guys that I think are going to have the biggest impact on their teams this upcoming season, and it starts with that guy right there. Jeremiah Smith is a difference maker. This was an absolute layup for me because he was the biggest topic of conversation coming out of Columbus throughout spring practice. He was everything. He had pretty much unlimited amount of highlights from those practices and was compared to LeBron James in spring games. So yeah, it's going to be him being the most impactful freshman, that's for sure. I do think he's someone that is super, super important going into this season, and frankly, I can't remember a time I was quite as excited to see a non-quarterback freshman play football. I want to see this kid on the field so bad this upcoming season and as quickly as possible, and frankly, if Chip Kelly cares about the fans of college football at all, he'll throw a deep fade to this kid on the first play, just for fun, just to make everyone get a little bit excited and see what this kid can do with a ball in the air. But definitely very excited to see what he can do. I think it's fair to have a 2.5 over-under on the number of times that he makes his way onto the SportsCenter top 10 plays, because he's going to make some players look dumb this year. I can almost promise you that. He's just a remarkable player, and if he's like this as a freshman, I just can't imagine what he's going to be as a junior, but we'll get to there when we get there. Let's move right along to Oregon here, and Elijah Rushing is huge. The other guy here is Gatlin Berry, fantastic wide receiver, but not as worried about the wide receiver play. He might return punts as well, which could help this as well, but I do think edge rushing is going to be huge for this team this upcoming year. I do think Jordan Birch and Mateo Uyunglele will be the starter. Will be the starters and will definitely do a very good job at those two positions, but I do think rotational rushers are hugely important for the elite teams across the country. You saw last year one of the guys at Georgia, Jalen Walker, coming in on some plays, the third down plays, just to get a sack. Those guys are huge, bar none. They're absolutely massive to your team's success if you want to be that elite team. And Elijah Rushing is a really good pass rusher. So I do think he's going to be someone that is going to be ready to play pretty much from day one. I think he was ready to play when he showed up on campus, but he's definitely someone I expect to get a ton of snaps and make some big plays for the Ducks this upcoming season. But let's move along to Penn State here, and I've talked about this guy a couple of times, but Luke Reynolds is huge for this team. He was a 5-star tight end they brought in, and he's one of those guys that you almost just need to hit almost right away because the pass catchers down in Penn State are not what they want them to be. Now, it's not necessarily a terrible group. I do think Harrison Wallace will be in for a really solid year. I think Caden Saunders can take a step forward. I do think Julian Fleming is a good player. I wouldn't necessarily have him as my wide receiver one, but that's where Penn State is at. I do think the tight ends will be huge. Tyler Warren is the one that will get a lot of the hype going into this season, but Luke Reynolds is just a pure pass catcher. He's a very, very good player and one of those guys that you're going to need pretty much immediately. You can use multiple tight end sets, whether it's 12 or 22 or whatever personnel you want to get into. Make sure you have those two tight ends on the field and allow them to kind of open doors, whether it's Tyler Warren, underneath and it's Luke Reynolds going over the middle on a seam route, whatever that looks like. You need this kid on the field because you just need as many elite pass catchers on the field as you possibly can get. So I think he's going to be hugely important and one of those guys that if we look back at a very successful season for Penn State, you're going to look back and see a number of receiving yards next to that guy's name. But let's move on, and same situation with Michigan. They need pass catchers. There's no two ways about that, and Marion Stewart is absolutely that guy. He can do that, and no question about it. And he's one of those guys that's really interesting to me because he brings something to Michigan's offense that I frankly think has just been missing a little bit. Now, Samaj Morgan is doing a great job of trying to bridge that gap, but this dude is outright speed. That is his thing. He absolutely flies on the football field, and I think it opens a ton of doors for them. They're going to run the ball a ton at Michigan. That's the way that they butter their bread. That's the way that they're going to go about business, but when you can get those really, really speedster guys, the guys that once the ball is in their hands, that's when the magic happens. It makes life so much easier on your quarterback, whether you're running a ton of drags or a ton of screens or quicks or whatever that looks like. The ability to just not throw the ball that far downfield and still get 35 yards because a guy is so dynamic with the ball in his hands, that is a huge, huge thing for a team. And I definitely expect him to be a huge player for this team this upcoming season because I do think they do have some really good players. I think Tyler Morris is in for a big-time year up there, but I am a little bit worried about the depth at that position and the ability to spread the ball out the way that they're going to need to. So I think he's going to make a pretty much immediate impact on this team, honestly. So cannot wait to watch him. And then we'll get into Marcellus Williams, a very, very talented player at USC. He's coming in at the cornerback position, and the USC defense is going to have a couple of freshmen that just need to take big snaps. That's the reality of the position that they're in. They do have a relatively good front line for the most part, but the depth is just not very good, just plain and simple. They do have some guys coming off the edge that I think are going to be important this upcoming year in the freshman level, but when I look at that back end, I just have tons of questions. I do think that they brought in some really good players from the portal, but getting those guys to play together is not always the easiest thing in the world. And I do think that Marcellus Williams will absolutely get a ton of snaps at that cornerback position, and then it'll be really interesting to see what he can do with it, but because USC might just need him to ball out right away. I'll be totally honest. So it'll be really interesting to watch this kid. I think when you look at USC, there's tons of needs on the defensive side of the ball, and young guys are going to have to fill a lot of those voids. And then let's move on to Iowa, and I promise I'm not trying to make a joke about Iowa, but their punter is the most important player for this year. Reese Dakin is a very, very important player for them. And whenever a freshman comes in and takes over a position that is really, really important and can define multiple games, he's going to be this guy. So he's coming in to start, and field position is going to be huge. And especially for a team like Iowa that is going to be running the ball aggressively, that is going to be not quite as explosive as we've come accustomed to them being explosive, but the reality is, I do think this is someone that could transform their season. It sounds, like I'm trying to poke fun at them. I'm not, but at the end of the day, I do think special teams, turnovers, how long you have the ball, time of possession are hugely important for this team, because they're probably not going to win the explosivity battle. They're probably not going to win the talent battle, but they can win all the others. And this guy will have a ton to do with that, and it'll be interesting to see if he's someone that somehow wins them a game this upcoming season with some great punting, but it'll be fascinating to watch that. And then this is the easy one. Dylan Raiola going to Nebraska was the thing in this last recruiting cycle. He was as big of a deal as I've ever seen someone walking into a university, because you're walking into a huge one, and you're walking into one of the biggest, most historic programs in this sport, and you got to save it, essentially. You are the savior of the program, and it's going to be incredible to watch this kid develop, because there's so much on his shoulders. I can't even imagine what he's going through on a daily basis, but if he handles it well, this is a very capable team. Now, if he crumbles under that a little bit, it'll be very interesting to watch what happens with this team, but overall, there's no one at the freshman level that has more pressure, that has more energy, that is more important to their team than that guy right there, and it is not even close. I hate when people do that, but this one's not even close. I'll be totally honest. Wisconsin, Kevin Haywood is a huge offensive tackle for them, and this one's a little bit more interesting because there is a world where Haywood just doesn't take a snap this year, or at least a non-garbage time snap this year, and that does beg the question, why is he so important? And frankly, it's just because he could. There's so many important things for Wisconsin this upcoming year, but O-line depth is not necessarily something they love. I do think they do have 5 offensive linemen that'll be solid, but you need about 8 or 10 if you're going to be an elite team at this level, at this point in college football, and he's someone that might just have to jump in at right tackle or jump in at left tackle, and that would be huge for him. But regardless, whenever you have a big-time offensive lineman come in as a freshman and start, or even not even start, just be in the 2 deep and be someone that could be called on, he's going to be huge. It was the same reason why Kelvin Banks, when he came into Texas, was such a big deal. Will Campbell, when he came into LSU, same exact thing. You're going to need some guys that can come in and play right away, and if something goes wrong in that offensive line, this is going to be the guy they call on, and he might just have to play some huge snaps down the stretch for Wisconsin. And then finally, Washington. And I have Damon Williams Jr. here, the quarterback. And this is more me kind of projecting what I think Washington's going to be this year. And frankly, I think it's going to be 2 quarterbacks are going to start throughout the season. I think Will Rogers will start the season. I do not think he will end it. I really like Will Rogers. I think he's a fantastic player. And I do think that him and Jedd Fisch is a relatively good fit. I just don't think they're going to win enough games. And I think there's going to come a point in the season, whether it's 7 or 8 or 9 games in, where Jedd Fisch is going to start saying, maybe it's time to start getting ready for 2025. Obviously, that's not the greatest mentality, I suppose, but at the end of the day, if you can get a kid ready by putting him out on the field for the last couple of games or putting him out on the field earlier in the year if things aren't going well with Will Rogers, I think it's going to benefit you in the long run. So I think this is one that I am projecting a little bit that Will Rogers will not be the starting quarterback throughout the season, but at the end of the day, I do think this guy is hugely important this season, but also going forward in the next couple of seasons for Washington. This might be one of the most or the most defining player in what Jed Fish's Washington is going to look like going forward. So a ton of big-time guys in the Big Ten. There's no two ways about that. There are so many freshmen that are going to make waves. Jeremiah Smith and Dylan Raiola are the ones that everyone's going to be talking about. There's no two ways about that, but tons of other guys. There's no two way. There's so many guys that definitely are going to have a ton to say about this upcoming season, and just cannot wait to watch it all unfold. But let's take our last break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about a hot take Thursday I have around being a blue blood and how much it actually means compared to how much people seem to think it means. But we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the most important freshmen for all of the Big Ten contenders. Some big-time guys out there, Jeremiah Smith and Dylan Raiola leading the way, but tons of other guys that you definitely should watch. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, definitely check out that segment. But let's get into a Hot Take Thursday, and this one's around Blue Bloods because it's that time of year when everyone's just itching for someone to hit someone. Everyone just wants football back so bad that the blue blood conversation comes out. And this one happened around Oregon for whatever reason, because Oregon is on a tear. They're doing an incredible job in recruiting. They have built up a really, really good program under Dan Lanning. They're also a million miles away from being a blue blood. That's just the plain truth of it. But at the end of the day, it is an interesting conversation. So let's get into this, and let's start with my criteria. Let's start with who I think is a blue blood in this world of college football and who I think isn't. And my list is pretty simple. Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Notre Dame. I don't think I need to explain those. I'll be totally honest with you. Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Oklahoma have been dominant for quite some time. Michigan is the leader in wins all time. I don't think I have to answer that one. And then Notre Dame, one of the most historic programs in the entirety of college football. That one's a layup to me, no question. Then you get into the guys that are teetering just a little bit. Texas, obviously, there was a lot of momentum to pull them out of this group as they struggled the last, 10, 14 years. But I think this last year might have just saved them for a little bit. I do think that was a huge year for them to prove that they're still in that conversation. They can still get themselves up to the level of the elite in the sport. So I do think Texas is safe for quite some time here. Nebraska is the one that I think is teetering probably the most on this one. But at the end of the day, when you dominate the sport for a good 35, 40 years, you're a blue blood in this sport. I understand it was quite some time ago, but it doesn't change that they controlled this sport for quite some time behind Tommy Frazier and some other just remarkable players. And then USC had one of the craziest runs in the 2000s and has been a team that has popped up a number of different times throughout history and been the talk of the town for quite some time. So those are the 8 teams as I see it. I understand, you do have some teams that are right on the outside looking in that could absolutely be argued to be in. And I'll kind of get into some of those teams here in a second. But overall, I think those are the teams that I got. I think those are the teams that have defined college football throughout generations, have, a history that precedes them as one of the most well-known. Everything goes in the direction of those programs. We can argue all night and day about those last 3 teams or the couple of teams that should be in but aren't. But at the end of the day, what does it matter? I'll be totally honest. Every time this conversation comes up, I kind of roll my eyes because I fully understand that being a blue blood is a very cool thing. It's a awesome thing for a team and a fan base to say, we're a team that defines college football. We're a team that has been around for so long and has been the class of the sport for X number of years. That's a really cool thing, and I'm not arguing that. I'm just arguing it doesn't mean anything in current college football. I think when you talk about Alabama, when they walked in, when Nick Saban walked in, I think you could make the argument that Alabama was a blue blood, but they solidified themselves over the last couple of years. So who's the next team that can possibly do that? And I think when you talk about that, when you talk about who's the next team that can kind of bring themselves into that group, it's Georgia. There's no two ways about that. What Kirby Smart is building down there is definitely a team that could jump into this conversation, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if they're a blue blood or they're not right now. They are the best program in college football. Any of the 8 that I just said are blue bloods in the sport would trade their situation for Georgia's right now because it's the best situation in the country. They have absolutely everything going in the right direction, and they're not slowing down. In fact, I would argue they're speeding up. I've said it on here before. I think this 24 team is the best team that Kirby Smart has ever had. So this team is terrifying, and the idea that them being or not being a blue blood changes anything about what this program is and will be going forward is just insane to me. I'll be totally honest, but let's get to the team that started this argument, which was Oregon. And I said earlier, they're miles away. Having no national titles makes this not even a conversation. I really like Oregon. I think they are a program that is building up an incredible next 10 years and will be someone that maybe you can kick them around in those conversations coming forward. But as of right now, they are just miles away from being in that group. It doesn't change that half of that group would change what they are doing for what Oregon's doing and would take what their situation, throw it out the window, and take Oregon's, because Oregon's in a better situation than a ton of those teams for the next 5-10 years. So I don't really get the argument that everyone has. I understand that it's really, really fun to, go after some big-time teams and say, well, we're a blue blood and you're not. So that's the card that we hold over you. But I'll be totally honest with you. If you're using the fact that your team is a blue blood in a conversation or an argument in college football, you've lost. I'll just be totally honest with you. You've lost that conversation. You might as well move on to the next one because it doesn't mean anything. If you're not winning games in the present, no one cares what you did in 1980. It's not to say that we shouldn't celebrate those teams and recognize those teams for what they are, because they are the teams that define college football in so many different ways, and they are the teams that have stood the test of time. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change what's happening right now on the field, and that would be Oregon tearing apart a team like USC, or I'm blanking here, Georgia tearing apart a team like Texas or a team like Bama. It doesn't matter is mainly the point that I'm making. But at the end of the day, being a blue blood can be fun. There's no two ways about that. And there are certain benefits that do come with it. I do think there is a certain lean, a certain bias towards those teams because they are so important in the sport, and because, let's be honest, they bring in a ton of money when they are on TV. They are huge entities, and it definitely does make for some really fun matchups. When Texas and Michigan play this year, it's going to be really special because watching those two programs with all the history they have is a really cool thing. When Notre Dame plays USC every year, or Texas OU, or obviously Michigan Ohio State, those are huge games, and it is because of the history behind those teams and behind that rivalry. So I don't necessarily have an issue with that, but at the end of the day, Georgia against Florida is awesome. Ole Miss playing LSU is awesome. Penn State playing Michigan or Ohio State is incredible. So it's not necessarily like this end-all be-all that if you're not in a game with a blue blood in it, it doesn't mean anything or it's not as important. But overall, I fully understand why we lean on blue bloods as aggressively. I fully understand why this is a big topic of conversation, because college football, as much as any sport, is about history. I think right behind baseball, because baseball is just ridiculous, but college football is about history, and celebrating the programs like Nebraska with Tommy Frazier and doing just ridiculous things for so many years definitely deserves a lot of respect and deserves to be in this group. I'm just saying the group doesn't necessarily mean all that much when you lace them up on Saturdays. The group doesn't mean that much when you meet a Georgia player in the hole, because he's going to dominate you. That's just the reality. So I do think that it's one of those things that maybe, it helps out being a blue blood, because they're blue blood for a reason. The recruiting footprints, the revenue, the brand, all of those things do matter when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to building up who you are. But it doesn't change that other programs can do it all the same. Georgia has done it over the last couple of years. Oregon's in the process of doing it. Penn State is trying to get up into this conversation and is likely the team that I think is just on the outside, would likely be the 9 there, maybe the 10 behind Georgia, but it's splitting hairs at that point. Overall, there are a ton of teams that are huge in college football history. There are so many teams, whether you're talking about Florida State, or you're talking about Tennessee, or Penn State, or Georgia, or whoever, that aren't blue bloods. And I understand that there are a certain group that are just a little bit above the pack, that have defined the sport for quite some time and over the past, 100 years, but it doesn't change that over the next 5 years, I'd much rather have Georgia or Oregon situation than the majority of the blue bloods that I had in the earlier part of the segment. So I do love that we have blue bloods. I love the conversation. I love that we celebrate these programs that have been so important to the sport. I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily matter. It's a really cool title, but honestly, nothing really more. But overall, it's a very interesting conversation every year. It's one of those times of years where we're just itching for football. We want someone to hit someone so bad that we get into these conversations that I think are a little bit goofy, but at the end of the day, it is thought-provoking. It is very interesting to talk about, and overall, blue blood is very, very fun to talk about. Doesn't necessarily mean too much, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people covering every single sport you could possibly want. In fact, we have my guy Kenneth coming up right after me, so if you want to stick around and watch him, definitely do that. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go.